Can see my chin. How about that? I do have one, but should I get cold? Okay. All right. We're up in three. Hey, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Santita Jackson Show, second hour on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It is a joy to be with you. We got a lot to talk about. Uh, the president is saying that the Republicans should take over the voting in 15 places. 15 places. What does that mean? What does that mean to nationalize these elections? The elections are controlled by the states. This would turn everything that we know on its ear. Well, certainly I think we're due for a shakeup because we don't need to return to the way things have been. We need to go toward the way things ought to be. Remember, we are trying to form a more perfect union. And the presumption in that is that things need to be perfected. Things need to be made right. And so the League of Women Voters have decided to protect your vote, to protect you at the polling places. We desperately needed peacekeepers to strengthen election protection at polling places with ICE everywhere, with all of these different police forces. I mean, America has become militarized. Will people come out and vote? Think about it. The Somali American community votes more than 90%. They over-index in the vote. Given the attacks upon their community, will they show up in their primaries in a couple of weeks? Will they do that? Think about that. What about other people? Not just Latinos. What about Black people? Remember, we have more than 1.4 million voters in Florida were given, they were restored. They were restored so they could vote, ex-felons. And then that was overturned by the Republican state legislature. Was that right, Daryl? So it makes, and then we had a Black woman in Texas who wondered if she should vote. Her mother said, "You better go vote. You served your time. Now it's time for you to go back and vote. I know you can vote." She talked to the election judge. She explained her situation. She said, "Yes, of course you can vote." Well, then she had to go to jail. So when you have things like this going on, what about the vote? What if ICE are at checkpoints as they are as you're driving to the polls? And what about people who really do not have the best of intentions? What if people try to stir up mischief at the polls? I mean, how do we keep the peace? What is this Peacekeepers Initiative about, Jane Ruby? Of course, we've got Attorney Daryl Jones, the chair of the Transformative Justice Coalition. Attorney Daryl Jones had to snatch him off of my brother's radio show to get him over here to mine, but I'm happy about that. And Jane Ruby, League of Women Voters of Chicago. The Peacekeepers Initiative, what is this about?
Yeah, well, to put it into context, there's been a long-term election protection coalition of multiple organizations, both nationally, statewide, and locally, that for many election cycles, many years, have worked together to promote a hotline for reporting any sorts of problems at the polls, the 866-R-VOTE hotline. And I both come from a campaign side and also my work with the league. Even before ICE has been terrorizing our communities, there has been threats of people at polling places. I have seen baseball bats being, swung at folks. I have seen elected officials, put little cards with, your polling place has changed, and people go and it's an empty lot, and, they're de-incentivized from voting. There's so many forms of voter suppression, voter intimidation that is just, happened since the beginning of our country and our 250 semi-quincentennial years, that to have sort of this incredible, robust election protection coalition, both, nationally down to the grassroots level, has been so important in, being able to make people feel safe at the polls. What we're noticing is, in conversations with communities all around the city of Chicago, is people are scared of ICE intimidation. And it's not just ICE, it's all of the other, organizations, the federal organizations that have been deputized to do the bidding of ICE as well. We have to sort of, there's a lot of different groups in, under DHS that also can be doing this work, that we need to be sensitive to. But what we notice in Chicago is there's a lot of fear going into our election cycle. And what we have been seeing in sort of any sort of peaceful movement, it has been, civic groups, faith leaders, social workers, concerned members of the community, mutual aid, that have been the front lines of ensuring that people feel safe in their communities, not just in, contemporary times, but historically. And so we're really just sort of activating what is intrinsic to how human beings take care of each other. And we're creating a program to ensure that Chicagoans feel safe at the polls. And so it's sort of, it's part of this larger program that has kind of always been in place, but it's specifically in terms of maintaining the peace, maintaining that there are figures that are known in our communities that people already feel safe with, to be a front line of defense in case there is escalation. But also, it can just be friendly. Like, just because someone, just because ICE isn't going to a particular polling station, it's still nice to know that there are people that can maintain the peace there, and ensure that people are able to vote accordingly and feel safe voting. So that was sort of the initial idea. And, we the feedback we've gotten has been incredible. And we're really excited about all of the different local and community partners that we're going to be bringing into this as sort of a pilot in Chicago.
Well, before I go any further, I've got to say happy birthday to Lorraine Dunkley. She is one of our founding Morning Stars. Happy birthday, Lorraine Dunkley. Hey, everybody, wish Lorraine happy birthday. Jane, Daryl.
Happy birthday, Lorraine.
Hello. That's right.
Happy birthday, Lorraine.
Her husband looked like Ken and Barbie. They are like really gorgeous people. They're like the black Ken and Barbie. We had one of those couples at Howard University. They were like gorgeous. There you go. And wonderful children they have. We love you, Lorraine. Happy birthday. Happy birthday. May God bless you with many, many more. Before I pivot to, let me ask you this, Daryl. As you hear Jane Ruby describe this Peacekeepers program, this Peacekeepers initiative, I'm wondering if they should not export this to Minneapolis. I mean, Minnesota, highest percentage of voters in the country. The Somali community, Somali American community, more than 95% voter participation. I think it's at 97%. I mean, it's unbelievable. You've got people who are, and it is lauded as having the most integrous election system in the country. I mean, they don't have voter fraud. They just don't. And you're more likely to be struck by lightning than you are to commit voter fraud. Okay. And the cases of voter fraud that we have been seeing, remember the Republican gentleman who in North Carolina, they were going to your house and getting your mail-in votes and he was changing them. Who does that? So it's something that we need. Is this something that we need in Minneapolis in particular? I mean, because they're like in the voting season, like right now. They're about to vote in the next couple of weeks.
Right.
Would that make sense there?
Yeah, Santita, that's a great question. And yes, it would is the short answer. And hats off to the League of Women Voters in Chicago for the effort that they're undertaking with the Peacekeepers Initiative. Let me share this. 2 years ago, we initiated what we call Clergy to the Polls. And the concept with clergy to the polls is this was big in Georgia at the time, was one of our focus areas. And part of the reason we were focusing on Georgia because there was a lot of uncertainty as to how people were feeling going to the polls. They were feeling all kinds of ways. They didn't necessarily feel protected. In Georgia at that point, they had shuttered a lot of the polling places, which meant that folks had to go to a different polling place, and then they reduced the number of machines that were at some of the polling places, which increased the line, which increased the probability of people to have encounters while they were in line. So what we did was that we did clergy to the polls, which is part of the peacekeeping concept that Judy is speaking of. And what the clergy to the polls did is that while people were in line, they would engage with them. They would pray with them if they wanted to pray with them. There were studies that showed that when we had faith leaders at the polling sites, it had a calming effect on everyone that was there. It made people feel comfortable that we're waiting in line. It reduced incidents that might have been that may have been wanting to kick off. It reduced all of that. So the peacekeeping concept is a phenomenal concept, and it does bring about a level of comfort for people that are wanting to vote but may feel a little nervous about voting. We anticipate, and we touched on it a little bit, we anticipate that ICE is going to be around some of these polling places. We anticipate that that there are going to be some blockades to make it difficult, what they call the checkpoints, to stop cars, to see what's going on at some of these polling places. So we know there are going to be shenanigans and things like that that are going to happen. It's not a question about if, they're going to happen, and they're going to be focused on Black and brown areas and progressive areas. That's where it's going to be focused. So the peacekeeping initiative can play a large role in keeping people calm and keeping incidents from occurring. Because we know something's going to happen. And we know that if people are in place to try to keep it calm, it will make the people that are waiting to vote or going to vote feel much more comfortable. So, yeah, Santita, the election protection side of it, we know it works, we know it's effective, and we certainly look forward to teaming up with the league and putting that type of initiative across the country. It's a yeoman's job, as they say, to get it done, because you have polling places all across the country, but you're going to try to hit as many of the hot spots as you can. And you're going to call out and ask faith leaders to just come out and just be there. Spend an hour, spend 2 hours, there at some of the polling places that are just in their communities. Because we know that when there's the trusted messenger, all of that goes a long way of being certain that we're able to safely and calmly be able to go and exercise our right to vote.
Jane, why don't you model for us what this is going to look like in Chicago? And please do that for this Minneapolis audience, and quite frankly, for people from all around the country who are tuning in, because we're in the throes of the election season. 2026 has started, we're looking at March, Illinois, Texas. Minneapolis is like right now. That's about to happen. They're in the caucus system. That's about to happen. And one has to wonder, given that they're in the caucus system, people have to get to the venue so that they can caucus. And Attorney Jones just made mention of checkpoints, because that's what ICE have done. They have checkpoints. And one has to wonder, how is this going to work? Because people need to get to the polls, like in a place where they caucus. Or if people because you have to walk into the polls, we don't drive through. So model what, if the peacekeepers bump into ICE, what do they do? How is this supposed to work?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And I think, to Daryl's point, nothing of, what we're modeling in Chicago for the March primary is a new invention or a new idea. This has been modeled, in other places. I think, as Daryl will also sort of vouch, when you do these sorts of programs, it's going to look different wherever you are. There's different election rules, there's different demographics of people, there's different ways that you handle this. So it's not sort of a one format that works for all. Like we've been pretty lucky that there is a hotline system that has been sort of a unanimous hotline system that has just sort of been able to be adopted everywhere. But the actual sort of grassroots component is going to look different. What we're doing is, we're looking for organizations to partner with, especially along the lines of faith, social, and civic groups that, deal with, mutual aid, immigrant population, all of these sorts of systems can, the work and training that they do already plays very much into, where we can kind of plug them in. And then we're going to be hosting de-escalation sessions and trainings to ensure that.
Hold on. Explain what a de-escalation session would be. Because this is sounding very much like the Highlander School, which is where Dr. King, Rosa Parks, people went there to train. I mean, people don't realize that before you marched, you had to undergo training. White McKee used to talk about that because that was something that we did at Operation Breadbasket. We did at Operation Push because you need to know how to march. And so what is de-escalation? Because we're living in a time where things are heightened. Oh, right? This is it's unsettling.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so glad that you mentioned the Highlander School because that has been very much in my brain. There's actually the author Elaine Weiss just wrote a whole book called Spell Freedom that talks about, the Highlander School program. And, it's very much conceptually what I'm thinking about, because I think, we are getting back to a point where those sorts of schools and programs, is really what we need to look towards to better our way out of the current circumstances. So de-escalation training, we obviously would never put anyone in any sort of physical danger, but in terms of intimidation at the polls, and Daryl can speak to this, the Transformative Justice Coalition has this awesome, and I literally talk about it all the time. They have this awesome flyer of all of the different forms of voter suppression that we've seen in time, and it's such an eye-opening thing as to like what actually qualifies as voter suppression, voter intimidation. There's a lot of stuff even on the list that I wasn't even thinking about just because it wasn't an experience I had. But having people, to Daryl's point, a calming presence standing outside the polls, acting as poll watchers inside, being just sort of a person and a presence can make a huge difference. And that's what we're looking for, is people willing to, put in a few hours on election day to participate in the program, but also know, if ICE shows up, what are the steps that you can take in order to ensure that people are protected? What is the know your rights component that people need to know in order, if there is an ICE escalation that happens? But also, there's different intimidation. You can have campaigns harassing people at the polls, with flyers being like, vote for my person or else. There's a lot of different other things that it's also knowing the proper techniques for being able to be a resource for people who feel scared waiting in line to vote. And so that can take sort of many different modes. And we're, all of the peacekeepers that we're training, already will have some interest or some foundation in, mutual aid, civic, community-based stuff, and then connecting it with, a much more structured vocabulary, plan of action for, if X, Y, and Z happens. And so ensuring that everyone is trained. We also still will be doing our normal election protection program, which is the 866-R-VOTE hotline, which everyone should know, which that's in the case of, you go to vote and the machine's broken and you need to report that. The hotline will be able to connect you, with your Board of Elections to ensure that a technician comes. It has to do with, if an election judge is trying to coerce you into voting a particular way, you can report that to the hotline. If your polling place is closed when it should have been opened, you can report that to the hotline. And there's different pathways of lawyers, board of elections, professionals, and sort of police and law enforcement also that can handle escalations like that. So it's sort of that's where we're talking about this as an extension of an existing program, but it's very much rooted and grounded in sort of the civil disobedience movement, protecting each other, calming presence, and just ensuring, best case scenario on election day in Chicago, there is no voter intimidation happening in any of our polling places, and people are literally just standing around, and that is always the best case scenario. And I wish that for all of our election protection people, is that there are no problems, because that ensures that our elections are working as they should and need to work. But if there are any sort of problems, there is a mechanism for being able to timely and appropriately respond.
Daryl, I mean, we need that right now all over the country, because I'm wondering, just with the president calling for the Republicans, a party. I don't feel comfortable with either party controlling the elections. That's, I just, you know, people need to be able to vote, whatever party they're affiliated with, Republican, Democrat, Independent, Green, that all these. I mean, there's so many different parties, and I think that you need them all.
Mhm.
Help me to understand what the president is calling to do. I mean, and just because to me, this program, this Peacekeepers initiative, Jane Ruby, this is like happening. I know it's not new, but it's something that you're relaunching right in this season, in this moment. And in this moment, we've got the president calling for 15 places to be controlled. What is the president calling for, Daryl?
Yeah, that's precisely it. What he's calling us for is sort of a nationalization, if you will, of the of the election process. Right now, the elections are controlled by the individual states, and the states control all aspects of how an election is carried on. What the president's calling for is a nationalization of that. That is for the federal government, and particularly really the party, the Grand Republican Party, to be able to determine how elections are to be run, rather than allowing the states to determine how elections should be run. And let me start, and Santita, I've got to take this opportunity to say that in 2022, 2021, we were pushing for the Freedom to Vote Act. And the Freedom to Vote Act, had it been enacted, we would not have this discussion right now, because it laid out nationally how elections were to be conducted, early voting that was mandatory, and a whole bunch of other pieces that go along with it, including the right of people that were formerly convicted of felonies to be able to vote, and when they could vote and how they could vote. But what's happening now, since that did not pass, is that you have all the states able to do whatever they want to do, with no real ground foundational piece as to how elections should be occurred. So what the president is saying is that he wants to step in. He wants the federal government to step in to determine how the elections should be carried out, and for the federal government to carry those elections out. That's part of, in stepping in that direction. That's why I believe you saw the takeover in Fulton County by the FBI and all the other agencies that were there, the federal government going in to seize the voter data and everything else. What I suspect you're going to see come out of that is that the federal folks are going to now say that there was some finagling going on, and some inconsistencies, and votes that were counted that shouldn't have been counted, and all this kind of stuff, and try to change the results of the election. What they're after is not necessarily to change the result of the 2020 election, but it's to sow the seeds of doubt so that they can say that the federal government is the one that can come in to straighten all of this out. And this is the reason why they want all these states to turn over their voter data so they can go in there and they can be the ones to run the election and to straighten all of this out, which, without question, would lead to, I just think, a horrible end with regards to who's able to vote, how they can vote, and when votes are actually counted. So that's what he's after. You're going to see a lot of pieces that are coming along. They're going to be attacking voting rights. Right now, we know the SAVE Act, right? It has been reintroduced and is being reheard in Congress. And what the SAVE Act would do is, again, it would reduce and restrict the identification that people can use to be able to vote. So that the one noteworthy example is that if you're a person who registered to vote as under your maiden name and you got married, and your identification did not match what was there on the voter rolls, you wouldn't be able to vote. They would remove you from the rolls. You wouldn't be able to access that. You'd have to actually bring in some situations your birth certificate to be able to vote, to prove your name. So there's a whole lot of stuff that's going on from the SAVE Act that is really bad, that they're trying to really suppress people's rights to vote. And this is the culmination of everything we see that's happening. This is why groups like the League of Women Voters in Chicago and other leagues of women voters are going to be out there at the voting places to be certain that people have access, that when they're interacting with election officials, that they have someone with a basis of knowledge to be able to speak on their behalf. So a lot of that, Santita, is what we're going to see going on, in addition to the stuff that President Trump has, with the nationalization and his executive orders saying that the only way you can vote is on the day of voting. The executive order, they don't control any of the voting stuff. That's the states, not the executive branch of government. So those are the type of things that are out there. You're going to see all kinds of seeds of confusion that are put out there. And the purpose behind all the confusion is to suppress the vote, is for people to think, I don't want to go through all of this. That's why you're going to see the National Guard, ICE, FBI, DEA that are going out and around those places that are to intimidate people. Whether that doesn't mean that they're going to say, you better not vote. They may not do that. Their mere presence will set in someone's mind, there must be a problem here. Otherwise, they wouldn't need all this police up here for me to be able to go up there to vote. Or I might have, I'm not certain if I'm up with my probation officer. I ain't going up there. I'm not going to mess with that. Those are all suppression techniques that are available and may occur. And we expect many of it to occur during this election cycle.
Let me address this. Solomon, I always appreciate your being here. I don't know if you even listened to me 6 years ago, so you don't know what I said about the 2020 election. Because I did raise questions about the 2020 election, just as I raised questions before I got on the radio in 2000 about the 2000 election. Because had the vote been allowed to go through, Al Gore would have been the president, because he actually did win Florida. I don't feel comfortable with cheating. My father raised us this way. I remember him talking to my brothers, because my brothers were in competitive sport. My sister's a long distance runner, so it's not really as competitive. I play tennis just for a little bit of fun, but I'm not into sports per se at all. He tried, but it didn't work. But my brothers played football. They played college football. Used to have played for the Cavaliers, UVA, Division I football. And my father would attend as many of my brother's games as he possibly could. And you would see him standing next to the coaches up and down the field. Drove them crazy. No other parent did that. My father just went down there because he played Division I football too, briefly, at the University of Illinois, but he's a quarterback at North Carolina A&T. And he said, you know what? A reporter was with him this particular day that I was with him. I think it was an article for GQ or something. And he said, because Youssef's team had lost, St. Albans had lost, and it was a really, really, really tough loss, a really tough game. And he began to tear up. And Dad, was holding his helmet, and he was talking to him, son, sometime you're not going to win every game. But that's okay. You gave it your best shot. And that's all that I could ask of you. And that's all that you could ask of yourself. And the reporter asked him, how do you teach your children how to deal with losing? He said, oh no, I haven't taught my children to lose. I've taught them to take life with equanimity. I don't mind losing. I just don't want to be cheated in order for that to happen. See, he said, I can live with a loss as long as it's fair. He said, that's what I love about sport. And I can live with losing an election. I'm not hardcore anything. I'm not a hardcore partisan. I'm hardcore principle. Whoever is going to get us to ending poverty, I'm with you. Whoever's going to get us to opening up the system so that everybody can vote. Because in some states, you can be they don't have a quarrel with ex-felons voting. You just come out, you serve time, and you vote. It's an uneven system. That's what's problematic for me. I promise you, bless your heart, Solomon, you're moving away from where the majority of Americans are. Democrats and Republicans are shrinking in America. Independents are growing. People want solutions. That's why Mamdani won. Mamdani won because no one looked at his party. They listened to his platform. And they said, he's someone who wants to address affordability. New York has 8 to 10 million people, and about 99% of them can't afford to live there, but they got to work there. That's ridiculous. And that's the case for most Americans everywhere. So I hear you, but I don't want to see anyone cheat. And I don't want to see any one party control the elections. And you shouldn't either. It's not fair. It's not right. As an American, you ought to be appalled by the attacks upon our electoral system. Benjamin Franklin said, it's a republic if you can keep it. We're in our 250th year. What do you want? Where will you go? Where will we go from here? Chaos or community? Dr. King asked that question. What are we going to do? I don't want a Democrat. I want the democracy. I don't care about a Republican. I want the republic to survive. That's it. I don't want us to be independent enough to vote however we want to vote. And I want to be protected while I'm there. And I think that the polls should be a peaceful place. And I hope that we do not have choke points that will keep people away from the vote, from their ability to vote. I didn't see you getting upset when they only had in Kentucky for 600,000 people, one polling place, one that opened late but closed on time. Be upset about that. If the Democrats wanted to control 15 places, I'd have a problem with that. I'm like, no, this is not how this is supposed to work. Dwight McKee, may he rest in peace, said, you know what? Democrats, you all need to watch out attacking Trump this way, because when he wins a game, you know that he gets even. And he's going to come into office doing that. Did Dwight not tell the truth? Mm-hmm. And we were incredulous. And were you not, Daryl? He said, yes. Okay. I mean, but don't even look down. It sounded so out there, but it's true. Stop. And make a contribution to the conversation, Solomon, that makes some sense. Everyone here knows, everyone who listens to this show knows that I seek to be fair. Stop playing games and stop trying and be a participant. Don't troll. If you want to be provocative, but be provocative with some information, with the accurate information. And you've gotten enough time today. But I'm saying that for anyone else who is similarly positive in their thinking, who's listening to the show, who's participating. We have a serious problem, Attorney Daryl Jones, and Jane Ruby, on our hands. We are in an election season where the president is threatening to nationalize the elections. They're supposed to be run by the states, and the states don't have it right. I am very concerned, Jane, that people are having trouble walking around our streets already. So when we're divvying up the resources, which is what politics is, and you do that, the elections, I'm wondering just how peaceful it's going to be, which is why you are holding trainings, right? So we can make sure that people know how to deal with infringements upon their right to vote. I know I've ranted, but I had to do that because I want us to be fair. I'm concerned about the Republic. I could not care less about Republicans. I'm concerned that we're not going to increase the democracy. We still don't have a democracy yet. We don't. We're trying to get there. We're trying to get there. So, Jane, will some of these classes be virtual? Because I really do get the sense that people in Chicago need this, but people all over the country need this. What do you think?
Yeah, 100%. And I've actually already spoken with other local League of Women Voters chapters around the country. So Chicago's primary is March 17th. That's coming up in just a few weeks, in order to sort of, really pilot this out. And then, there's other primary elections that are happening, through the rest of the year going into the November election. So in the same way that these sorts of things have always kind of been going on in our elections and activating people, there's going to be continued activation, even after our primary election. Like, this is, the being at the forefront of defending and expanding our democracy is a full-time job for everybody. And there's many different ways in which people can participate and be activated. But it starts with, I've said this before, being a citizen is a 24/7 job. It's everything from taking care of your family, your partner, your children in your own home is still a responsibility of citizens, being an active, informed participant in this country. Walking down the street, following road rules, going to school, doing your schoolwork, going to, either college or training or whatever, going to work, paying your taxes. These are all things that are built into being an active and informed citizen in our country. Things like voting is also built into that package, but it's the thing that's been, most under attack, and also the thing that, the powers that be always feel threatened by, because it's sort of the most basic example of us making determinations as a collective of what the future of our country looks like. And that's why it's always been a limited process of who can participate, and why every other marginalized group has fought through the years to build that much more inclusive democracy. It's because of how powerful the vote really is. And, that's where we need to make sure, in addition to ensuring that election day is protected and people feel safe voting, we need to ensure all of our neighbors, all of our community is registered to vote. They all understand who's on their ballot and are able to safely make decisions about who they want to represent them. It's ensuring that, there are no excuses on election day for why people can't vote, whether it's, childcare, transportation, weather is a huge thing that, is a deterrent for people not voting. Vote by mail and the postal system, ensuring that, wherever you are, what the rules are around voting and how your ballot actually gets counted. It is all part of this larger package that it's inherent to how we all should be participating in our government, in our elections and in our government, especially, all three of us on this call, at different times in history, we would have not been able to vote in the first elections in our country.
Mm-hmm. That's
Like
absolutely true.
that's the truth. And that's the truth that the federal government would like to, in many aspects, would like to get back to. But all of our groups in different ways have fought, and our ancestors have fought and died for the right to vote.
Well, wait a minute, I have to needle Daryl a bit, because Daryl on paper would have gotten the vote before we did.
That is true.
That's true. That's true.
Look, I am not upset about it. I think it's important, though, for us to, I think after Hillary Clinton ran in 2008, it was in not 2016, but 2008. Nick Kristof from the New York Times said, his takeaway from the election was this. He said, while racism is wider, he said sexism is deeper. And Shirley Chisholm told us, we were having dinner. She said, a black man will get it before a white woman. We looked at her like, wait a minute, what? She said, oh, absolutely. That was her experience when she ran for president. She said to see how men of all colors joined together to make sure that she didn't have a space at the table. I mean, and that's, I just think, when I hear these things, because making that, you're really helping us to say, for you to say, Jane, I mean, you said, wait a minute, look at this panel. At the founding of the Republic, none of us could vote. And I'm like, you're right. And Daryl got the right to vote before we did. But you keep on going. The fact is, white women were still behind the 8 ball, even though they could vote. It was the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act that opened the doors up, for everybody. And I'm just wondering now with, how do we get involved in this program? Because I was asking, is it virtual? Can people who are not Chicagoans look and study what you're doing, or is this tailored just to Chicago?
So the program we're launching and hoping to, place people at is Chicago focused. We are looking to pilot, help other groups bring similar programs. Transformative Justice Coalition is sort of, my guiding star in a lot of the election protection space, not just because the League is, a national partner with TJC, but also, we've worked on a lot of different projects through the years with Transformative Justice Coalition, both nationally and in Chicago. But, they really have such a incredible depth of information around what voter suppression looks like. Everyone should have this incredible flyer that they put together. Like, I literally talk about it weekly. It's that powerful. But, they also pilot, intensive election protection programs in different states around the country every election cycle. So, they're a great resource, in looking at kind of the national picture too. And, I'm very hopeful not only to sort of be able to work with them for the Chicago program, but also, it's something that we really need to see in a lot of other places, and not just for whatever the primary election is. It's not just for the general, like this sort of community-based support around elections is important in every election, regardless of who is in the White House or who isn't. Like, this is just sort of a foundation of, caring and ensuring that people feel safe exercising their right to vote.
So Daryl, where are we now? Because now there's this real discussion. Because I think that what Jane and the League of Women Voters of Chicago are doing is so important. And I'm glad that it's being piloted in Chicago, because Chicago is a whole lot to take on, as we all understand politically. It is. You need all that you all are doing and then some. What We need this. We need this program with a quickness everywhere, and with all the work that you and the Transformative Justice Coalition have been doing it and are doing. What are some of the what are you on the lookout for in this season? I mean, because we've been talking about 2026. It is actually here. Minnesota is voting. It's days away. Uh,
Mhm.
Illinois, Texas. We just had these. It already started. Look at what happened in Texas this past weekend.
Mhm.
I mean, and you had two monumental races. I mean, and they kind of, we've been paying so much attention to Minneapolis that we just kind of slept on those, and they were huge,
Mhm.
huge, huge victories. What help me to understand? I mean, what should what should we be prepared for? What are you doing? What do you want us to do? First of all, we need to find out if we're still registered to vote. And
And you know
everybody,
that's where I'm going, Santita. You know that's
Greg,
precisely where I
Greg
was going.
Palace. That's right. Greg Palace will be in Hinsdale at the Unitarian Church on Maple Street. It is on Thursday night at 6:30 p.m. They will have popcorn. It's going to be really great. You need to be there. They will have a Q&A after they show Vigilantes Inc. Go to gregpalace.com because they're also going to be doing that nationally. Vigilantes Inc. But I really, really hope that if you are in the Chicago area, you will go to Hinsdale so that you can see Greg in person. No one has done more work in this space as a journalist than Greg Palast, and he is a real treasure. Daryl.
No, you're absolutely right. And matter of fact, just to highlight what you've just said, highlight it, underscore it, and put it in bold, is that the Vigilante movie that Greg put on and created is a movie that we use to train our young folks, and
Mhm.
and we don't do it toward the end. We hit them with that in the very beginning, and it's because it is so powerful. It's so meaningful. It's done extremely well. You're looking at it and you're like, is this really a fiction movie? Because this cannot
Mhm.
be true. What I'm seeing happen, and to learn that that it all is true, and the things that are experienced and that are going on in different parts of the country to suppress the vote. Are things that people just need to see, they need to hear. When Jane made reference to, we have a piece that's out, 72 forms of voter suppression. Well, it's now increased. That now I think we're around 86 forms of voter suppression,
Wait a
and
minute. You went from what to what?
from 72 to 86, and
Oh my God.
forms of voter suppression that we've been able to identify across the country. And so we encourage people to go, you can go to tjcoalition.org, tjcoalition.org, and you can find the forms of voter suppression, the pamphlet that's there that lays it all out, all the various forms of voter suppression that exist. So what we're looking for, Santita, in answering your question, are these different forms of voter suppression as they're occurring across this country, and being certain that these hurdles that are being presented, that we're trying to equip people with the knowledge to be able to get over those hurdles, so that they'll know that, if someone comes and challenges them, what they should do, what steps they should take. They should know. And as you were saying, Santita, you hear me saying, I feel like a broken record sometimes. I tell everyone that, when you go for your birthday or whatever, you need to do a checkup, right? Your checkup on your voting rights. Go to vote.org and be certain that you haven't been removed from the voting rolls. Go
Mhm.
to vote.org and be certain that you know where you're going to vote. You can go to either vote.org, or you can go to vote411.org, vote411.org. Either one of those resources will provide you with the information to let you know if you need to do anything to be re-register your vote because you've been removed, or
Mhm.
if you're a returning citizen and you're wondering, do I have the right to vote? Both resources will provide that information for you. But you need to go there, and that's step one, because you can't get to the right to vote unless you're registered with the right to vote. And so you've got to be certain that you're registered. After the registration, and things that we're going to be looking for, are all kinds of ways they're going to try to slow things up. We already know. that the Postal Service has indicated that if you're in a rural area, that they're slowing down the mail, right? And they're not going to postmark your letter when you put it in the box necessarily. So, if you're in a rural area and you're 50 miles out from one of the distribution centers, it may take 1 or 2 days before your ballot gets stamped. And if you're in a state that says that if your ballot isn't stamped, postmarked by the day of the election, that it's not counted. So you've got to be aware of that. You've got to know that's going on. We're going to see all kinds of things along those nature that are going on. We're going to see what Jane talked about. We've seen in the past where they've had people at different polling places that have been armed, right? Wearing these long coats, carrying weapons, carrying rifles or what have you, all done to intimidate voters. So we've got to be certain that we're aware of all these things that are out there. We've got to remember that there's always 866 our vote that you can call if you run into any situations.
Wait a minute. Stay right there, because you have always said that when you call 1-866 our vote, if you encounter a problem at the polls, that you don't leave the polls, right?
That's right. That's right. Absolutely. Do not leave the polls. And for those that are procrastinators and want to wait to cast their ballot because they want to do it on election day, remember, you lifted up the situation in Kentucky. One of the things that people have to may not know, and this is the reason I say this, that may not know, is that in Kentucky, when they limited to Lexington and Louisville for the 2 voting locations for the entire place, right? When they limited to that, they went to sites that had limited parking. So even though you might be at wherever the Kentucky Wildcats play basketball, there's going to be limited parking. And if there's limited parking and the polls close at 8 o'clock, if you're not in line by 7:59, you can be denied that right to vote. And so we've got to be certain that people are aware that so long as they're in line by 59, they have that right to vote, and they've got to know they can stand on that right to vote. We had a young brother, Santita, that we trained out of Chicago, and he and his wife went the last moment to vote. And they were in line, and I think the polling place in Chicago closed at 8 o'clock, if I'm not mistaken. And they were in line at 7:59. And the folks came up to them and told them, you might as well just go home because y'all are not here in time. You're not going to be able to vote. He fortunately, because of the training, because of the knowledge, knew to say, y'all don't leave, because you've been in line since 7:59, so you have the right to vote. That's the type of information that people have got to have and be equipped with to be certain that they're exercising that right. But Santita, I always say it all begins with you going to vote.org or vote411.org and being certain that you're registered.
But also call 1-866. Thank you, Effie Rolfe. She's a legend in the church space in radio, and we thank God for Effie. Sending you so much love, everybody, and still wishing Lorraine Dunkley Hay a happy birthday. But don't leave the polls until your issue has been resolved and you've been able to cast your vote.
Absolutely.
And see, I'm going to tell you something. I don't like these provisional ballots. I want to go in the booth and vote. But what happens when you don't have same-day on-site voter registration, which we have in Illinois? Jane.
Yeah, if you don't have same-day voter registration and you encounter an issue where they're saying you're not registered, they'll give you the option at that point to cast a provisional ballot. We don't encourage people to do provisional ballots, but if you get to the point that it's either a provisional ballot or nothing, then you need to cast that provisional ballot and follow up with that provisional ballot. Most states now have ballot tracks where you can track the ballot and see if your vote has been received and is being counted. So you got to be aware and just know that all these things exist. We will be operating again some of our election day programming that we do, because we monitor elections around the country. So if issues are going on, we're able to try to resolve issues where they're happening around the country. We'll be doing that once again this year. And remember, you can always team up, right? We team up with the League of Women Voters, but we also team up with the National Bar Association so that we have lawyers that are on the ground in the various states throughout the country. So, there are all kinds of access and resources that are available to help voters if they encounter issues, Santita.
Jane, you should close us out. This Peacekeepers initiative from the League of Women Voters of Chicago is being launched in Chicago, but it is a program that we need to have all over the country. And I just can't help but pray for the family of Savannah Guthrie. We're praying that her mother will be found safe and alive. News outlets are reporting that they've received, that there are ransom notes. I just hope that her 84-year-old mother has her medicine, which they said is life-saving, life-extending. Oh, there's just trouble everywhere. But we're certainly praying for her family and for anyone who is in any difficulty. I pray that your load has been lightened. I hope that your heart will feel a healing and know a peace that surpasses all understanding. In times like these, all you have is your faith. That's all. If you're a person of faith, I certainly am. But if you're not, whatever it is that you can cling to that is high and good in this universe, please do that. But let's send that family a special prayer. And anyone you know, send prayers to anyone who is in any difficulty right now. It abounds. But so does hope and so does joy. And so do our good feelings. And prayer changes things. Jane Ruby, League of Women Voters of Chicago, close us out. What is your initiative? How can we find out more about it? How can we get involved, whether we're in Chicago or not?
Yeah, our website has a page for this election protection initiative. So if you go to lwvchicago.org/election-protection, you can learn more about the initiative. There's a form to get involved. There's also information about the Election Protection National Coalition, of which Transformative Justice Coalition, also does work around its information about the 866 Our Vote. I often, when I get on calls or meet people or talk to people, it's always like, how are you doing? And I find that in the times that we're living in, that's a very difficult question to ask.
Mm-hmm.
But, especially in our work, and that includes you too, Santita, in a very, you're very politically involved as well in your work. We're really struggling, and every day there's new stuff going on. But I think one of the things that's so powerful also about voting, not just in what it can do to change the lives of many, is also it's such immediate action and such a, basic, straightforward process of ways that people can feel like they're empowered to take immediate action. And, in Illinois, we have incredible voting laws. That's not the case everywhere. But to do whatever you can to ensure that you can vote is a huge way to feel like you have immediacy over the situation, that you have power over what the future of our country, the direction we go in, the way that we can take care of each other. You're not just voting for your own interests, you're voting for your family's interests, your neighbor's interests, your community interests, your country's interests. And all of these things are connected, and it's sort of one really easy thing. It's not like you're voting every day. It's, one day, 2 days, however it works in your state and your community. But it's not an everyday burden that you have to take. It is, one action that can really make an impactful difference. And what we're just trying to do is ensure that, people feel safe. And this is it's natural. And it's something that we all should kind of be thinking about, in addition to putting, your bodies on the front lines in a peacekeeping sense. People should be, if you have an elderly neighbor on your block, seeing how they're going to get to the polls. Chicago in March, we can have snow, we can have rain, we can have all kinds of weather. People might not be able to, drive themselves to the polls. everyone can, reach out to an elderly neighbor, see if they need help getting to the polls. Someone has a small child, offer to watch the kid while the parent goes and votes. Making sure that people know when the polls open, when the polls close, what your vote by mail options are, whatever the voting process is, it's really easy. As Daryl said, there's lots of websites, Vote 411, vote.com. There's different ways that you can get information about how to vote where you are. So there's sort of a place for everyone in the process of election protection, ensuring that everyone is able to exercise their vote, and ensuring that there is fairness and integrity in our democratic processes. And that's the thing that kind of keeps me going, and keeps me hopeful about the world that we can create together.
Well, everybody, I tell you, fighting to have peace in the voting spaces is not new in the American experience. Your vote really, 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 really is important. That is why it has been so reluctantly granted. And we've had to fight for it every step of the way. All Americans have. Anyone who was not a propertied white male did not have the right to vote. Think about it. And we were either in slavery or we were in peonage as indentured servants. Indentured servants, you could buy your way out of it. You could work your way out of it. Slavery, it was perpetuative. It never, ever ended. And now many of us are beginning to see that maybe this has been everybody's problem all along. Think about that, everybody. Because none of us are free until all of us are free. Until everyone has equal access to a safe vote at a safe voting space, no one will be safe. And if we're not safe, the republic will not survive. And we certainly will not have the democracy that we seek to have. Think about that, everybody. Get involved. The League of Women Voters of Chicago. This Peacekeepers program is a program that you need in Minneapolis, St. Paul, that you need all over the country. So everybody, please take a look at it. And we're going to be talking about this throughout the week, throughout the year, because we've got to let you know exactly what you need to do when you get to the polls. We're going to do just what we did with all of my other shows with you, Daryl. Remember when I used to bring you on for a segment at the beginning of every show, no matter what? Jane, we're going to start doing that because we have to walk people through. Because now we are being threatened with our free movement in America as never before. So if it's hard for us to move freely, what do you think it's going to be like when you want to vote? AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. I am Santita Jackson, attorney Daryl Jones, Transformative Justice Coalition. Jane Ruby, League of Women Voters of Chicago. I love you, Morning Stars. I love you, everybody. AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota.